Humble veterinarian who rises to fame. Yitzchak Shaul had not told Zevulun Binyamin why he took such an interest in him, nor why he devoted so much of his precious time to an ignorant Jew. But in the letter which Rabbi Nissen had written to his son, he had urged him to take the veterinarian under his wing and look after his spiritual welfare, for, he felt, here was fertile soil, upon which the seeds he would plant would blossom and flourish. Rabbi Nissen recognized, even from afar, that Zevulun Binyamin had in himself the makings of a great Jew, and if he could help him to such an elevation, he would have shown that every Jew can aspire to great spiritual heights, no matter from how low a level he should begin. Eventually, this previously despised Zevulun Binyamin earned the respect and admiration of the Jews of Dober Mizl. This came about when a dreadful epidemic attacked the town. The epidemic attacked young children in particular, as well as animals. When the death toll increased day by day, the people were literally terrified. Zevulun Binyamin, who had a lifelong knowledge and experience in dealing with sick animals, recognized that this epidemic was the result of contaminated milk from cows and goats that had been eating poisonous grasses. He knew exactly how to treat this disease, as well as how to combat its recurrence. He therefore quickly set about preparing his medicines, which he prescribed for the children, and gave instructions on how to avoid further contamination and spreading of the disease. The result was miraculous. In the course of a couple of days, the afflicted were cured, and the deaths among the infected ceased. He also treated and cured the affected animals. All the inhabitants of Dober Mizl and around just opened their eyes in wonder and admiration. So there was something in Zevulun Binyamin after all. Where no one else, either by prayer or practical application, had been able to do anything in the face of this dreadful calamity, the simple veterinary had quietly made up his prescriptions and brought relief and joy with his healing into many stricken homes. When the epidemic had completely abated, the Rav of Dober Mizl decreed a special day of fasting and prayers in gratitude to the Almighty for having sent his healing through Zevulun Binyamin. It was Erev Chodesh El, and all the Jews of Dober Mizl had gathered together in the Beis HaMedrash to listen to the words of their Rav. In his sermon, which made a most profound impression upon his listeners, he praised Zevulun Binyamin and said he had come like an angel from heaven to save their children. We can all learn from this episode, he continued, that the Almighty can choose anyone, however uneducated he may be, to carry out his missions. We must all endeavor to be worthy of such a choice. Saying which, he burst into tears, as was his custom, when deeply moved in prayer. Our sages tell us when a community is at fault, responsibility and liability rest upon their Rav, who, as their spiritual guide, is meant to lead and keep his flock in the right path. If they go astray, it proves he has failed them. That is why I feel that the epidemic was sent to us as a punishment for some wrongdoing, and as head of the community, I feel the fault is mine. While recognizing the sorrow of what has befallen us, we must at the same time rejoice that the Almighty in his goodness has sent his salvation to the sufferers through such a humble person as Zevulun Binyamin. We can, if we will, learn so much from this. Everybody began to talk about Zevulun Binyamin and his previously unknown, or at least unrecognized, healing powers, as well as about the Rav's unstinted praise of him. There still were some who continued to make fun of him in his presence or behind his back, but whereas before this excited little if any interest, now there were many who spoke up in his defense and rebuked those who made attempts to belittle him. When Zevulun Binyamin had concluded his work in healing Dober Mizl, he went out into the surrounding villages to bring relief to the afflicted peasants. He was kept busy as he was alone in his role of doctor, so it was not until Friday afternoon that he managed to return to Dober Mizl in great haste, and the first thing he did was to rush into the merchatz in order to make himself ready for Shabbos. As he entered the room where the Jews were bathing, he heard himself being discussed. The room was full of steam, and no one saw that the object of their discussion had just come in. They were all talking about the way the Rav had praised the veterinarian. They agreed, too, that he was deserving of such praise. The simple Zevulun Binyamin, who was unaccustomed to such an attitude, on the part of his fellow Jews, rushed his ablutions, and literally fled before he would be recognized. He was amazed at what he had heard, and very disturbed to find himself the object of praise. He hurried to his friend Eliezer Reuven and burst into tears, telling him what had just happened. The two smiths, Eliezer Reuven and Yitzchak Shaul, had been so happy to see how their humble friend had risen to a place of recognition and respect in the community, and now here was the poor man in tears. "I've heard it said that if one receives a reward on this earth for a good deed, the merit is deducted from one's portion in the world to come," he said between sobs. "Now people will hear me being praised and will envy me," he continued, "and you know that is a thing which does not appeal to me in the least. Don't you think it would be a good idea for me to leave Deber Mizzle and go to a place where nobody knows me?" he pleaded. Eliezer Reuven spoke comfortingly to his friend and tried to reassure him, telling him not to worry, and accompanied him to shul. As the two friends walked together, they discussed the wonders of the Creator, who had created grasses which could heal, and grasses which were poisonous. "Yes," said Zevulun Binyamin, who knew much about the powers of nature, "God has further shown his greatness by giving the animals the instinct to recognize which grasses they may eat to their advantage and which to avoid as being poisonous. It is seldom that animals eat of the poisonous grasses, and even when they do, there are still some grasses which have the ability to nullify the poisons already imbibed. It is ridiculous to attribute to me powers which belong to the Almighty. Anyone who knew which elements are contained in the various plants and herbs could have done the same as I did," he concluded, unaware that this was a most unusual modesty. They had now reached the Beis HaMedrash, and as was his regular custom, Eliezer Reuven was among the first of the worshippers to arrive. He was looking for an opportunity to rid himself of his friend, for he wanted to put some money in the charity box which always stood in a prominent place in the Beis HaMedrash. From the day he married, Eliezer Reuven had arranged with his wife that they put a penny aside morning and evening for charity. Also, whenever they sat down to a meal without a guest, they put aside the amount that his meal would have cost them. Then, as each child was born to them, they added a penny on its behalf, so that each week there was a nice little sum collected by his wife, which he took along with him in a handkerchief, and when no one was looking, quickly put into the charity box in the Beis HaMedrash, so that by giving his charity secretly, it would be a worthier deed. As the two men entered the Beis HaMedrash on this particular Friday evening, they saw the 11-year-old nephew of the Shamish busily sweeping the Beis HaMedrash. They realized that something must have happened, and learned from the lad that the Shamish had fallen and broken his leg. Eliezer Reuven and Zevulun Binyamin quickly took over his duty so that when the other congregants arrived for Kabbalah Shabbos, everything would be ready and in order. It had long been Eliezer Reuven's custom to change the weekday pareches for the more elaborate one used on Shabbos. He believed it was a segula for keeping peace in the home and blessing one's children with long life. Zevulun Binyamin filled the laver with water, lit the candles for the Yamid, as well as those in the candelabra which hung suspended from the ceiling. When the other congregants assembled, he took his place as usual behind the bima. After the service, he was still standing quietly in his corner, reciting the chapters of Tehillim which Rabbi Yitzchak Shaul had advised him to repeat after each time he davened, when suddenly he was startled by hearing himself addressed from behind his shoulder. "Shalom Aleichem, Reb Zevulun Binyamin," the Rav said to him, and as he realized that he had actually been addressed by the honorable title Reb, Zevulun Binyamin was overcome with emotion and burst into tears. "Dear Rabbi," he asked in the midst of his tears, "will I not have my portion in the world to come diminished on account of the great honor I am now receiving?" "Do not be upset," the Rav told him reassuringly. "You certainly will lose nothing of your portion in the next world. It is only those who pursue honor who thereby lose their portion in the world to come. But you, my friend, are not pursuing honor, but receiving it as your just due. You have nothing to worry about on that score. Your portion will remain undiminished." Zevulun Binyamin calmed himself as he heard the comforting words of the Rav. But what a stir was created among all the others who had seen the Rav seek out Zevulun Binyamin and address him with such honor as he shook hands with him and bade him good Shabbos. It needed neither telephone nor telegraph for news to get around in Deber Mizzle, and before the news had fairly reached the ears of the congregants who were present that evening in the Beis HaMedrash, practically everyone in Dober Mizl had learned of the astonishing event that had taken place. Zevulun Binyamin was now treated as a person to be reckoned with, but instead of being pleased by the unaccustomed attention afforded him, the honor was unwelcome to him. He continued to be the same simple, unassuming veterinarian as he had been before he became the hero of the hour. There was one person in particular who most emphatically welcomed the new status acquired by Zevulun Binyamin, and that was none other than Yitzchak Shaul. Another matter which pleased him was that he had now received word from his father Rabbi Nissen that he had finally chosen the most suitable young man for the vet's young daughter Dina. His name was Yirmiyah. He was a very learned young man and an orphan. Rabbi Nissen wrote that he had spoken with a young man who had expressed himself willing to meet the young lady, but he would not be able to make the trip to Dober Mizl for another few months. When Zevulun Binyamin heard the glad tidings that Rabbi Nissen had found a real Torah scholar who was willing to contemplate becoming his son-in-law, he was overjoyed. Now he could really feel an equal with his fellows. Yirmiyah arrived in due course and made a most pleasing impression upon both father and daughter. The young man, too, was very favorably impressed with Dina and approved of the father. There being no reason for a postponement, their engagement was immediately arranged, and Zevulun Binyamin was so happy about it and so enraptured with his future son-in-law that he at once gave him sufficient money for his expenses until the time he would return for his wedding. Naturally, being in a position to support him, he also assured him of his future care, telling him he need have no worry about his finances, for he, Zevulun Binyamin, would be more than happy to attend to that as long as he lived. The joy of this simple Jew knew no bounds when his friend Yitzchak Shaul came to tell him that not only he but also the Rav of Dober Mizl was more than satisfied with the scholarship of the prospective groom. Not only as a Torah scholar did Yitzchak Shaul excel himself, he brought the benefit of his brilliant brain right into the humble smithy. He introduced all sorts of innovations to improve their business, and one of them was his invention of a certain attachment to a plow, which, while it was in action, broke up the earth into small pieces. This saved a great deal of time for the plowman. When the peasants heard of Yitzchak Shaul's invention, they all flocked to the smithy and begged him to fix such an attachment on their plows, and they were happy to pay the price. This naturally made quite a nice sum of money, which Eliezer Reuven could not otherwise have expected, and so his youngest son-in-law was proving himself a very exceptional young man indeed, and his father-in-law could not but admire him for his obvious ability. Yitzchak Shaul's work was becoming known both near and far, and many noblemen sent him orders to attach his inventions to their plows. They also gave him their orders for making carriages, for he had shown his ability in every branch of the work at the smithy. "What do you think of our brilliant son-in-law?" Eliezer Reuven remarked to his wife. "Here have I been working in the smithy for the past 40 years without being able to introduce a single innovation. Then here comes the yeshiva bacher and shows us his tricks," he finished with evident pride. "The answer is a simple one," replied his wife calmly. "Wherever you find a Torah scholar, there also you will find wisdom." "It is in fact the Torah to which the credit should be given for my invention," said Yitzchak Shaul. "It is in the Mishnah that mention was made of a plow which had an attachment for breaking up the soil. I noticed that the plows which the peasants brought to us for repair did not have such attachments, so I decided to introduce this innovation, and you already know how successful the idea was, and we owe it all to the Torah." Yitzchak Shaul's purpose in doing manual work to earn his living was not merely because he wished thus to make money, but he reckoned that in this way he would have more and better opportunity of coming into contact with the workers, getting to know them, and winning their confidence, as though he were one of them. He wanted to help them achieve a higher spiritual level by teaching them of the greatness and nobility of our rabbis and teachers, and to give them the incentive to follow their ethical teachings. He explained the Torah to these simple souls in terms which they could grasp and appreciate. Yitzchak Shaul also began to teach his own wife. Every Shabbos he read the Sedra to her and explained it to her in Yiddish. Soon his mother-in-law came along to listen, and then they were joined by other women.